Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to present here. And I feel very good to present here in front of the people for whose work I have always read during my PhD and postdoc times. So today I'll be talking about the multi-omics integration to identify distinct genetic and clinically relevant subgroups in multiple myeloma patients. So multiple myeloma, it's a cancer of plasma cells which are responsible for generating the antibodies. And multiple myeloma is majorly confined to the bone marrow, but sometimes it comes in the circulation and is called plasma cell leukemia and has much more worse prognosis than multiple myeloma. And the course of progression of multiple myeloma is known. It's considered to be an incurable cancer, and it starts with either Angus or smoldering myeloma, where we cannot see the concentration of M protein in the plasma. And once it becomes active, with the general therapies, it is treatable, comes into the remission, but then there are multiple cycles of remission and relapse. And with every cycle of remission and relapse, the depth and duration of response decreases. And it's known to be a very heterogeneous cancer. Two major types which are known in the literature, hyperdiploid and non-hyperdiploid. Hyperdiploid is caused due to the amplification of odd number of chromosomes, and non-hyperdiploid is majorly due to the translocation of different chromosome segments, majorly the chromosome number 14 onto the IGHS locus, which causes the activation of genes like MAFS and MMSET and CCND1, which causes very poor progression-free and overall survival. So there are currently classifications using FISH and karyotyping or just using the gene expression. Limitations is that even in a particular subtype, there is remarkable heterogeneity. And there are also some defined high-risk lesions like IGH translocations. So patients having the MMSET translocation are considered to be very high-risk patients in case of multiple myeloma. Gain of 1q and biallelic inactivation of TP53, that is inactivation for both the copies of TP53. And there are a few gene expression signatures which can identify the high-risk patients. But none of these studies have tried to integrate the different types of data. That is, if we together see what mutations, what translocations, what copy number, and what gene expression is doing to these patients, it has not been done. So we took the approach of patient similarity networks, where we consider different types of data. For example, here mRNA expression and DNA methylation. We constructed the patient similarity matrices, and then we tried to construct the patient similarity networks. So these networks will have, and then we tried to combine into a fused network. So a fused network would have common and complementary information from the different networks. So there will be a few signals in the gene expression network, and there will be few signals which are there in the DNA methylation network. So fused network will have shared because if there is a strong interactions in both of the network, it will take care of it, and it will discard those interactions where we have just the weak interactions in a particular network. So to start with, we took the data from MMRS Compass, that is Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation. We took around 655 patients. So we had whole exome, whole genome, and RNA-seq data. From there, we defined the somatic mutations, broad and focal copy number alterations, where we get to know what kind of chromosomes are amplified or deleted in a particular patient. Then translocations, gene expression, and gene fusions. And we constructed these 6 different type of similarity metrics and tried to combine them. And we got 3 different groups, which one was hyperdiploid, which is already very well known. The second group consisted of MMSET and MAF translocation. And then third group consisted of cyclin D1 translocation. But then we took each of this group and tried to apply this complete method again. And we came up with the 12 subgroups, which were very homogeneous in a way. And then we tried to see which of these data types contributed most to the fusion network. So translocation, copy number alterations, both broad and focal, and expression were the things which were, contributing most to the fused network instead of mutations and fusions. And then how we selected the optimal number of, subgroups in each of the study. So we took two methods. One is eigengap and other is a rotation cost. So we tried to come up with a group which had the highest eigengap and the lowest rotation cost. So this is the overall, landscape of the 12 subgroups that we got. So first subgroup, which is a hyper-diploid group. Only, in clinic, it is considered to be one group. But we showed that we have 4 different types of subgroups in them. So first 3 groups are identified by the amplification of odd number of chromosomes like 15, 9, 5, 11. Although there is some difference in which chromosome is getting amplified in these 3 subgroups. And then there was one group which had, instead of amplifications, it had most of the deletions, and it was getting clustered together with a hyperdiploid group. And very interesting that we found an amplification of 1q among the hyperdiploid patients. So in clinic, hyperdiploid patients are considered to be, very low risk patients. But as I told that 1q is a marker of worst or poor progression-free survival. So this was a new group where we could see the amplification of 1q and amplification of odd number of chromosomes. Next, we found the second subgroup which had the MMSET of MAF translocation. So we found the 3 groups with the MMSET translocation and 1 group with the MAF translocation. And there was virtually 1 group which had no translocation, but there was amplification of 1q chromosome and deletion of few of the chromosomes. Similarly, if we look at the CCNB1, so virtually all of the patients had the translocation, but there was difference in the copy number alteration. There was 1 group virtually which had no copy number alterations at all, 1 group which had the 11q amplification, and 1 group with the 1q amplification. So this shows that when we together put the mutations, copy number alterations, and gene expression, we got to see the heterogeneity in the multiple myeloma patients. So we see these differences, but are these clinically relevant? Then we looked at the survival data, and before that, we compared our classes with the already available classes. This is a UMS classification, very well known in the literature for the multiple myeloma. So they define only 1 group for the hyperdiploid patients, whereas we have 3 different subgroups for the hyperdiploid patients. And then similarly for the MMSET translocation, there is only 1 group, but there are 3 different homogeneous groups now for the MMSET translocation. And similarly for the cyclin D1 gene. So we also found 2 groups, that is 1B and 2C, which were not, defined by this UMS classification. Now coming on whether these are, clinically relevant or not. So this 1 group, MMSET and MAP, had significantly shorter progression-free survival and overall survival as compared to the other 2 groups. And when we look at group 1, so we found one interesting group called hyperdiploid plus the translocation of MYC and plus the amplification of 1q. Which had the significant shorter progression-free survival and overall survival as compared to the other hyperdiploid groups. So this classification shows that we should not take all the hyperdiploid patients as together, but we should consider the 1q amplification status of these particular patients. When we looked at the group 2, we had 5 subgroups, and we found a group with MMSET translocation and 1q amplification, which was significantly different from just MMSET. So in clinic, if you have MMSET translocation, you are considered to be a very high-risk multiple myeloma patient. But then there is even worse if you have 1q amplification. So these things were not known previously from just the gene expression or the people who were just looking at the translocation. And when we looked at all the 12 subgroups, we found that this particular MMSET plus 1q amplification had the shortest progression-free and the overall survival. Okay. So then now if we have new data set, how to predict these 12 subgroups into those data, and we might not have the multi-omics data sets. So what we did, we developed a machine learning classifier where the we are taking the 12 subgroups which are derived from the multi-omic data set, but we are trying to predict it only using the gene expression data. So we got fairly well accuracy, using different of predicting the different subgroups and groups. And currently, this machine learning classifier is used at the Semaphore and Mount Sinai Hospital in clinics for developing a clinical trial where they are trying to see whether if we treat the patients according to these particular subgroups, whether they make any difference in the survival or not. So next is the validation. So we did on patient cohort of around 600 patients, but then we validated all this stuff on another cohort of approximately 559 patients from the GEO database. And we find a similar, differential progression-free survival and overall survival curves. And we still, the patient group with MMSET and 1Q translocation had, 1Q translocation had the shorter progression-free and overall survival. So after validating it, next question was that whether, if we adjust these variable with age, gender, race, and treatments, whether this finding still held true or not. So after adjusting with all these variables, still the patients with having the MMSET and 1Q gain was the most high-risk feature in our model. So next, majorly, international staging system and revised international staging system is used in order to see the high risk or low risk category of the multiple myeloma patients. But the status of 1Q is not included in any of these classifications. So what we did, we took stage 1 patients and segregated them having 1Q and not having 1Q. So in most of the cases, you will see there is a significant difference in the progression-free and overall survival of the patients having 1Q amplification or not. So this shows that status of 1Q amplification should be included in the revised staging system, although the status of MMSET translocation is available in the revised ISS classes. So next we look at the different pathways that were activated in different subgroups. So we do find the different pathways which were activated in these different subgroups of the patients. There were few shared pathways, but specifically different pathways for the different 12 of the subgroups. So next, when I identified this very high risk subgroup of myeloma, and we discussed it with the clinicians there, so they said that it is very important if you can also point us to the what precision treatment we can take against these subgroups. So we took the help of depth map that has the data of CRISPR-Cas9 screening for the different cancer associated cell lines. So we had the information about 60 cell lines in the depth map. So we used our classifier in order to assign a particular subgroup to these 60 cell lines, and then we tried to identify what were the essential genes in each of the subgroups. So we identified, for example, MAF. There was MAF activation in group 2B. So in 2B, MAF is activated. That is more easily understandable because in 2B, there is a translocation of the MAF gene. But MAF is also activated in other subgroups like 2D and 2E, where there is no MAF translocation. So this shows that there is an indirect activation of the MAF. And in such cases where there is indirect activation of MAF, we can use MAP kinase inhibitors in order to see for these particular subgroups. Next, we also found that CDK6 was activated in the MAF subgroup. There are clinical trials running where CDK6 inhibitors are being tested in the subgroups where MAF is activated. Similarly, we also found that FGFR3 was activated in particular subgroups of our subgrouping where this FGFR3 inhibitors can be used. So we also try to identify a few of the drug candidates using a pipeline consisting of a CIVIC database. So CIVIC database has the list of actionable alterations against the mutations, copy numbers, and the gene expression, and also using the machine learning models from GDSC and CCLE, and we predicted these to be the drug candidates for the different subtypes. So today I will talk about a little bit about the venetoclax. which is a very well-known drug, BCL2 inhibitor, and it is generally given to the patients which have higher expression of the BCL2. So what we show, so we looked at the expression of BCL2 across 12 of the subgroups, and we see that the expression of BCL2 is higher in this particular subgroup called 2B and 3B. So we thought that, you know, these two groups are good candidates for giving the venetoclax. But then it is also known that MCL1, which is the target of BCL2, confers resistance to the venetoclax. So then we looked at the expression of MCL1. So we see here that, you know, this particular group has also higher MCL1. So this would not be a good candidate to give the venetoclax. Whereas 3B, which has the higher BCL2 and lower MCL1, would be a good candidate to give the venetoclax. So similar results were also seen in the cell line data and the cancer dependency map data. Then we did some wet lab experiments where we predicted that, you know, this cell line is mostly correlated to the 3B group. And we checked these three cell lines, and you can clearly see that a cell line which corresponds to 3B, there is a decrease in the cell viability when we provided venetoclax as the treatment to this particular cell line. So the outcome of this study was that we identified that co-occurrence of MMSET and amplification of 1U correlates with a higher relapse risk and shorter overall survival. And we also identified that 1Q gain is a very single crucial lesion that should be included in the international staging system in order to better subgroup the multiple myeloma patients. So I will shortly discuss this one more study. So there is a drug called selinexor, which was recently approved by FDA for the refractory myeloma. And, you know, this clinical trial showed that the patients who had selinexor along with the bortezomib and dexamethasone, which is the standard care treatment, had better progression-free survival and gained the advantage of approximately 14 months. So this was known. So selinexor is a nuclear expert inhibitor, but what we don't know is to which patients we should give selinexor, because selinexor also has the adverse events reported for many of the patients. So we tried to predict their signature, you know, a gene expression signature, which can tell that which patients will benefit from the selinexor. So what we did, we had the sequencing data for the patients who were given selinexor along with the standard care of treatment, and the patients who were just given the standard care of treatment. Then we tried to identify the differentially expressed genes between responders and non-responders, and how responders and non-responders were defined. They were, you know, we took different cutoffs for the progression-free survival, for example, 18 months and more than that. And we also tried to see the depth of response, whether the response was very good or whether there was a partial response, etc. And then in the end, we identify the genes which were very specific to the, you know, patients who were given the selinexor treatment, and then tried to develop the Cox-PH survival models. And out of, by combining these two things, we identified that if we combine the expression of these three genes in the linear regression model, you know, we found that whatever patients had the higher value of this signature were performing well. So this is the signature of selinexor, that if you have a higher expression of this signature, the selinexor is going to work better in those patients. We also checked in the negative control where the selinexor was not given and there was no difference. So these markers are just not the markers of survival, but these are the markers of survival associated with the selinexor. So we also checked it into the other two cohorts. So this is STORM cohort where the selinexor was given. The significance is nearly significant, and one was the MSSM cohort. This was out of the clinical trial. In clinical settings, the patients who were given selinexor were checked, and this also validated in this cohort. So outcome was that a 3-gene expression signature accurately predicts the response to selinexor, and these signatures align both well with the depth and duration of the response. And we successfully validated in different tumor types and pre-treatment tumors from patients with glioblastoma also. Thank you for your time.
Great talk, yeah. Any comment on the heterogeneity of the tumors within a patient? Like, do all cells have the coughing aggravation that you mentioned? Like, do you think the signature?
No, there is a heterogeneity at the single cell level, and the next part of this work is going to handle that. And we have seen that if there is a 1q amplification, there would be a kind of cells which don't have a 1q amplification. So studying them at the single cell level is also important, so that we can complement the therapy in that way.
So I guess in practice, each patient might have different subtypes within their body.
Yes, the clonal evolution of the cancer is different, and also, there is few lesions, for example, 1q, that comes over the time. When the patient appears in the clinic, he may or may not have the 1q amplification, but with time, it acquires that, and that's the reason of the relapse, mostly in case of myeloma.
Yeah. Wonderful talk, Prabhala. I just have one question. So, looking at your data, did you look into the chemo-resistant aspect? Because when you are selecting those kinases and all those things, so did you look into the mutation data as well, where the mutation can affect the overall response of a patient?
Yes, we did have a look at the mutation data, but mutation is not, few mutations like NRAS and KRAS are playing very important role in the multiple myeloma patients. But other than that, copy number alteration plays a higher role in myeloma, instead of a mutation. And that's what we also saw in our network, that when we see that what we get using fused network, mutations had very less role in multiple myeloma. Although it's more in the solid tumors like lung cancer and breast cancer.
Comprehensive talk, thanks. So I had a question about this multi-omics data, the utility, right? So you just looked at gene expression data and you said that you could predict many of these 12 subtypes using gene expression alone. Have you also looked at the information redundancy or informativeness of the other data types? Like, so if you started out with methylation data or one of the other data types that you have, would you have achieved the same accuracy, or is it somehow that gene expression still contains the most?
Okay, so I tried it with the 6 different data sets. So when I take copy number and translocation together, okay, just copy number and translocations, then also I get a very good accuracy. But when I just take the gene expression, the accuracy is little better. Because even when a translocation happens, that communicates into the gene expression, so that information is coming up. So I tried developing the machine learning models using every single layer and maybe a combination of 2 and 3, but gene expression was the one which performed better.
Right. Really nice talk, Sherry. So I'm following on Sriram's question, when you're looking at clonal populations within an individual, when you say that there is a relapse, and more to do, your structural variants have got more to do with the relapse, is there a possibility that you can actually identify the drivers of relapse by looking at the early stage cancerous clonal populations? Because you have the gene expression data as well as the mutation data with it.
Yes, so that's the work that's still ongoing in the lab. So we are looking at the clonal evolution in a way that how if we deconvolute this data to the immune cell population. So we are also looking at the difference at the immune cell populations, and then now the MMRF is generating the data at the single cell level. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to predict the subgroup of every single cell in a particular tumor, and then try to see what is the difference in the subgroups, whether we have different subgroups, that 12 different subgroups in a single patient. A single patient might have 2 or 3 different subgroups, and then a concoction of different therapies might be useful in that way. So we are looking now in that way.
Sandeep?
Yeah, great talk. So actually, it's kind of follow-up to a previous question. So when you combine these data sets, right, let's say you want to make predictions just based on methylation versus you make predictions based on gene expression. Do you get contradictory results? Is it possible to get that? Because it's kind of just one of the things that we have been thinking about of combining gene expression data, single cell RNA-seq data with ATAC-seq and so on to predict, like, can't be done supervised learning algorithms that can give you cell types and so on, right? But can you get these kind of results? And also, is the accuracy also combine them in a certain way that maximizes accuracy? Because you can also, maybe there are different ways to combine the data, right? Yeah.
Yes. So if I get an example from this work, so when I just use the translocation, so you must have seen there was a one group, for example, CCND1. I'll just explain through a figure. Okay. So if I talk about this group, now if I just take, I don't know why this is not working. So if you just look at the third group, CCND1, and you just look at the translocation, so every patient has translocation. So if I try to predict, these three different subgroups only using the translocation data, I won't get any accuracy because virtually every patient is almost same. So, when I combine the copy number alteration data, then I get a very high accuracy, even if I combine gene expression data or not, because most of the, heterogeneity is just occupied by these two layers. So this depends upon what group I'm trying to predict. So sometimes there are few groups which are very good predicted by just translocation. For example, second group, because there is lower variation in the translocation as compared to the copy number. But in the third subgroup, a mirror variation is there at the copy number alteration. So that's why I developed, in the paper, I have developed a multi-omics model also. So if you have a multi-omics data, you can predict the subgroup using all the data types that you have. And if you just don't have the gene expression data, for example, while I was validating this work, I couldn't find another data set which had all the layers that I am using. So then, applicability becomes very less. So that's why I developed a classifier which just used the gene expression based on, because I was getting maximum accuracy through that particular layer.
Let's thank Sherry for this wonderful talk.